Hey crafty people! Welcome back to my channel, and in case you're new here, I'm Sarah, also known as Craft Nerd because I'm a nerd who loves to craft. I do paper crafting, card making, junk journaling, and mixed media art. Let's get crafting! Oh, welcome to my channel. Today we are doing part 2 of the video on one stamp, multiple looks, and giving you ideas on how to get multiple looks out of a single stamp. Now in part 1, we focus mostly on coloring techniques, and in part 2, we're going to focus on stamping and embossing techniques with the image. So actually I'm going to go back to some original footage because yeah, it ended up being too long and I decided to chop it up, and that was the best way to divide it. And then we'll come back and start on a couple more techniques I wanted to do. So for this, I've pulled out Tim Holtz and Stampers Anonymous's Floral Trims CMS 461. Okay, so for the first idea and first technique, we are going to stamp and emboss on some vellum. So I've got out my trusty little mouse pad that I use for stamping on, because having something squishy underneath you when you're stamping helps with the impression you're going to get. I'm also going to use Versafine, which is a watermark stamp pad. You can use, I know Tim Holtz has a embossing stamp pad, and I'm sure a variety of other places do. And basically this is just a clear ink, and so we're going to use that. And I decided to pull out, I've got Wow embossing powder, and it's vintage champagne, so it's kind of got gold and like a cream color to it. So we're gonna give that one a go, and I'm gonna pull over a scrap piece of paper to use to dump the excess embossing powder into, so we can tip it back into the jar. I can talk, really I can. All right, we're gonna start by inking up our stamp. Now you can use whatever ink you want when embossing. The difference between like a embossing pad and a regular ink pad, one is that it's clear, and the other thing is it tends to dry slower. So you're definitely gonna want a slower drying ink if you're gonna use a colored ink, because that is always an option as well. Press this down and hope I get a good impression, because I did not pull over my Misty, which I probably should have done, but too late now. So we're gonna see what we get. That actually did pretty good. I'm gonna put my piece of paper down, and misprints from a calendar I made for this year, and I'm gonna cover the whole thing with my embossing powder. That did pretty good. All right, we're gonna put our embossing powder back in to our jar. Set that aside, and then I'm gonna pull over my heat gun. Now, a couple things to keep in mind when you are embossing is you wanna make sure you keep moving the heat tool around, because you do not want to overheat your embossing powder, or what it ends up doing is it kind of like sinks into the paper and you lose all of the magic of having embossed it with embossing powder. All right, this thing's a little floppy, so I think I'm gonna try not to burn my hand and hold it in my hand, and hopefully you can see the magic. Another tip is to turn it on and let it heat up before you bring it to your paper. I rarely ever do that because I tend to be impatient, but here we go. Okay, I really like this embossing powder on the vellum. I don't know if I've ever tried it on vellum before, but ooh, it's got like a lovely sparkle to it. And I really like how this came out. Now, let me bring it up closer so you can see what it looks like all embossed. Don't know that the camera's doing it justice, because it is lovely. And then you could like rough cut around this and use it to create a belly band on a page. My dog is wandering off with something he shouldn't, so I'm gonna go deal with him. Or you could use it as a background on a card. You could put it over pattern paper, which is not that this is necessarily what I would do it against, but yeah, I really like how this came out. All right, I'm gonna go deal with the dog and then we'll move on to the next technique. Okay, so now we're stamping on like inky backgrounds so that you can see a bunch of different options for inky backgrounds. Now this was like a piece of book page that I used as a cleanup paper, and I think we're just gonna stamp it in. I'm gonna grab my Versafine Clair Nocturne. So I'm just gonna ink up my stamp. And that's the nice thing about the Misty. If it doesn't stamp perfectly the first time around, I can stamp it again. So there we go, it's already colored in. I think I may do it one more time just to darken up some of the spots towards the middle there. Oh yeah, that looks good. See, so you can take your already inky backgrounds, and this one's got some book page, so that's kind of cool. Next, I'm grabbing, this is an alcohol ink, not an alcohol ink, Distress ink background, and it's from my Distress Mystery Color video that I did a couple years ago where I pulled the names of Distress inks out of a hat, or actually an Eeyore mug, and then inked with them to see how well they work together. And this is Pine Needles and Ripe Persimmon. And so we're just gonna do this again. I think again I'm just gonna use the black ink and then wiping it off because it is not sticking, which usually means it's a little dirty and needs a little bit cleaning off, and it should come back to life and be sticky again. There we go, that's a little bit better. I like how that looks too. That came out pretty cool. All right, the next one I'm grabbing is, this is an index card that I printed with my gel plate. And so it's got acrylic paint on it. And I know my Versafine Clair is not likely to stay very well on this, but there is a solution. I'm grabbing out my clear embossing powder and getting that ready, because what we're going to do is we'll stamp and then we'll hit it with some embossing powder and emboss it. I'm getting just a scrap piece of paper, some like off prints to use, catch the excess when it comes off. Now I'm using a clear embossing powder, so the black will show through. Put that aside and put my embossing powder back. I want to do one more, and we're also going to emboss that. So let's go ahead and get that ready and emboss them both together. And I'm actually grabbing out white embossing powder for this one. We need to clean off our stamp because while in theory the white will completely cover up the black, I don't know that I want to risk it. All right, so I've got out, this is an alcohol inked background that I did ages ago. I don't even remember when I did it. And I've also pulled out, my Hero Arts unicorn ink, which is the white pigment ink that I like to use. I figure might as well reinforce the white every chance we get. And as with the painty paper, because acrylic paints are plasticky, alcohol ink you usually do on a non-porous surface, so it can be a little finicky about what ink will work on it. By embossing, you eliminate that problem. And our embossing powder. And our spoon. And I'm kind of wanting to just find like some like straight up dark paper to stamp it on in white and see how that looks. I may do that. Like we got really good coverage. I did get it in a few spots where I don't want it, since it's going to show up as white. You know, if you get clear places you don't want, it's not as big of a deal, but because this is white, we'll end up having white flecks. So I'm just taking a very soft brush and brushing it off if it's anywhere I don't want it to be. All right, so let's put the powder back, grab my heat tool or my heat gun, and we will emboss these guys. Now, if you're wondering, because sometimes I pull out my heat tool, which is the Ranger Heat It craft tool, and sometimes I pull out my embossing gun, or it's also a heat tool. The difference between the two, I believe they're the same temperature, but you'll notice more concentrated, more diffuse. So I tend to use this when I'm drying paper and this when I'm embossing because it works a bit better for embossing. So that's why the two different heat tools. A little something that got embedded in the embossing powder, and I wanted to get that up as quick as possible. All right, just double checking to make sure everything got embossed. Now, once it starts changing, and I don't know how well it's showing up on camera, the change from like grainy and cloudy to the gloss of the embossing, you want to make sure you move your heat tool around, because if you stay in one spot too long, you might overheat the embossing powder, in which case what'll end up happening is it kind of like sinks into the paper and you lose the raised glossy shine of it. So that's something to keep in mind. Do this one. The change might be easier to see because right now it's kind of dull and hard to see the image. I really like how that came out too. I just love this stamp. Beautiful results. So, and this is one of those things, I always forget how cool white embossing can be. And we've got that guy, and we've got this guy. Okay, so doing this one gave me an idea for yet another look, and that is stamping on dark paper with the white ink. So we're just going to use this, and I think it's a Craft Consortium ink pad, paper pad, but we're just going to use the white ink. Not going to emboss, we're just going to stamp. That's good. I'm going to set that aside to dry, and it also made me think of yet another option for stamping on dark paper, and that's with your Versamark, because at least for Versamark, I'm pretty sure your other embossing inks, they'll leave a watermark on a dark colored ink or dark colored paper. Do a piece in the purple. I'm gonna set this aside and let it dry, and we'll come back and take a look at those once they're fully dry. As you can see, I have my glass mat out and it's a little bit dirty because I was filming something else and had an idea. So I decided to go ahead and film that as well. And what I've got out on my mat is Impressa alcohol ink and watercolor tree-free paper. And it's cut down to, I'm not sure what size. Let's see, it is 6 by 4.5. And what I want to do is, I've got out Juniper, Moss, Chronicle, Mushroom, Monsoon, and Smudge. And we're gonna create kind of a piece across the middle kind of thing. Which I've also got, it's airbrush for doing like nail polish. And I picked it up on Amazon fairly inexpensively. And what I want to do is create like a smoosh across. I'm just gonna put down a few of the colors and some isopropyl alcohol, probably more Monsoon than I meant to do. A little bit bit of isopropyl alcohol. Let's see, I want to add more Smudge, I think. Chronicle. Shot of moss there. A little bit of rubbing alcohol. Okay, now I am going to cap stuff so I don't make a mess and move this out of the way. I'll be right back. Grab my mouse pad so we have something squishy underneath. I've got also a piece of coffee dyed copy paper off to the side because what we are going to do is stamp this, and we're going to stamp using alcohol lift ink, and it does just what it says on the tin. You ink up your stamp and it will lift the alcohol ink off of your piece, and then you can actually stamp it again off to the side, and it should be really cool looking. Ooh, that stamp was dirty because my alcohol lift ink pad is now filthy. That does not make me too happy. Let's go ahead and stamp this. Press it down for a minute. All right, let's lift that up. And it's going to take a little bit for it to react, and I'm going to go over here and stamp it off onto here. And so we've got the image stamped on here. I'm going to clean that off really well, and then I'm going to take a clean paper towel and initially you want to dab, and after doing that, then you can rub. I'm thinking my alcohol may have been on too thick. I don't know. It might be working. Well, it's working. It's just, I was hoping it was going to be a little more dramatic. Okay, I was expecting a lot more like this, where you have more of the white showing underneath than what we're getting through here, but I still think it's gonna be kind of cool looking. Very interesting. It's not exactly what I was expecting. Like, what I was expecting is, see, in this area here and over here where it's going more back to white, whereas here it's, and there's definitely crumbliness from my alcohol ink on here. I wonder if it's because of the paper I'm using. No, I think it's kind of cool. It's super subtle. I may give this another go, trying to be a little lighter handed with the inking, but there we go. That is stamping using alcohol lift ink. I did try it out on a piece of Clair contact paper that I had inked up with the same colors, and got a much better result from the standpoint of it actually lifting the ink. Yeah, closer look on that. So there you can see it actually lifted the ink, whereas on this one, what probably is part of it is that the alcohol ink probably stained the paper, and so instead of fully lifting it, we get that different stamp impression, because like, see here, you see it lifted. Same over here. So I think maybe this is due to staining on the paper. I don't know. Both are kind of cool. Okay, So for the next technique, I've pulled out some more of that Artist Loft mixed media paper because I'm just playing around with it and that's what I've got handy. Now let's make sure, so this, we need to adjust its location, yes. All right, so for this, we're gonna do some watercolor stamping. And I actually wanna do some regular stamping in the background on this to create a little bit of interest for the background. So I am gonna grab a couple things. Okay, so I've grabbed a couple things. And this is because I just want something kind of subtle in the background, not gonna be the main focus, but I thought it would add more interest to the finished piece. So I've grabbed a really old script stamp by Stampendous and some Versafine Clair in Sand Dune, and we're just gonna stamp it up. Again, I'm not too worried if it's perfect or not. And I'm only doing it on a block because it's just easier to hold it that way, because I'm just gonna stamp it around. May add a little bit more ink and try and stamp a little bit more down there. And I'm okay that that's messy. Now, for this part of this process, it's very important that you use a permanent ink, like a pigment ink, StazOn, archival ink, one of those, because we're going to do a watercolor stamping technique over top. And if you don't want this to move with the next step, you need to use a permanent ink. All right, let's bring the Misty back over. Put our piece of paper in place. And now what we're going to do is we're going to ink up the stamp. Now, you've got a couple options for inking up the stamp. You can either use like small cubes to ink, like to use multiple colors in your inking, or as I'm going to do for the first one, I'm just going to ink it overall in a single color, and I'm just trying to decide what I want to do. Go. Cracked Pistachio Oxide ink. Let's just pick a random different color, not necessarily one I would ordinarily go for when stamping with this image. Now normally when I do a watercolor stamping technique, I'll use an image that's usually a bit more solid, but since I'm trying to show you the versatility of a single stamp, we're going to go with this guy that has lines. Now that I've stamped it up, inked it up, I'm going to spritz it with some water so that when we stamp it, it's going to be a watery image. So there, the lines are a bit softer, and I think I'm going to spritz it again and stamp again to see if we can get some more movement, like up in there. And what we can also do, I'm going to put a little water on a block and grab my splatter brush. And splatter some on here. Now, to get the splatters to do something, I'm going to come in with a dry towel and just sop up some of that, but I may then want to ink the stamp again, depending on what result we get. Actually, I kind of like that. I'm kind of digging it, so I think we'll stop there. And it just created like more of a background. Like this would still need a focal image, at least in my mind, but that is the look we get. Now let's do one where we don't do the background stamping. I think because this is more of a lined image as opposed to a solid image, having the background stamp is more noticeable than it would have been if we did this technique with something that was a little more solid. Change colors. This time let's use a distress ink. Let's go Uncharted Mariner, because why not? And again, we're gonna spritz our stamp. It's gonna be a little bit heavier handed this time around. See if we can get more movement than we did on the first one. Oh yeah, that got a lot of movement. Now you could come in with a paintbrush and move that around a little bit, which I think I'm gonna do. I think I'm just gonna grab a paintbrush, add just a touch of water to it, and kind of blend out. Not gonna be too precious about it, but try and stick in the lines a little bit, or get a little bit messier. Because we've got it in the misty, what we can do is, once we're done this part, we can go back and wet stamp it again. Now, so that it flattens out and we'll have less trouble with stamping it again, I'm going to hit it with my heat tool. That didn't work as well as I would have hoped. Hopefully we're not going to have an issue when we stamp again. Fingers crossed. Or I'm editing this all out and doing it over again. Let's dry it, and I think I may stamp it one more time without spritzing. I'm gonna take a rag, sop up some of the wettest spots. I'm gonna dry off my stamp, and then we're gonna try stamping one more time without spritzing to bring back our details. So that's a very loose, watery effect. I kind of like it. I also am kind of thinking I want to redo the one with the background stamping with a darker stamp, like the Uncharted, or darker ink with like the Uncharted Mariner. So let's go ahead and do that. But yeah, I kind of like that. I also kind of want to do some blue splatters with the Uncharted Mariner on here. So I'm just putting a little Uncharted Mariner on a block, adding water. I'm going to grab my splatter brush, and I'm going to Alright, I'm going to set this aside and just let it dry on its own. And we are going to move on to the next technique. Okay, now another way to do the watercolor stamping technique would be to use some cubes to ink specific parts of the image in different colors. And so, let's make sure we're over so that you can see what I'm doing. I'm going to come in and hit the leaves with green. And in case I didn't say, it's important that you're using a dye-based ink for this, because that'll get the color to move when you spritz it. If you're using a pigment ink, if you do it quickly enough, it should move a little bit, but you're definitely better off doing it with a dye-based ink. And I'm trying to decide if I want to spritz, stamp, then ink in the next color or not. Let's go ahead and do that. So see, we've got our leafy bits inked in. Just gonna lightly tap off. I think I may need some more green in this area. Should probably have a copy of the image where I can see it to make it a little easier. All right, now I'm going to come in with a blue, and I'm using some Positively Saturated inks by Simon Says Stamp, because I don't have a ton of the Distress inks in minis. And I wanted to try out the Simon Says Stamp inks, so I bought a bunch of minis. Now, I did get it on some of the leaves, So I'm just gonna come in and do a little editing before I spritz it, so I don't get too much blue where I don't want it. Oh, I like that. Just trying to decide if there's anywhere I want to come back in. I think I want to add a little bit more green over here. So this is a nice soft look. You know what? It looks like it could use a little bit more. I like missed a spot on that stamp in there. And this is the nice thing about using like the Misty for something like that, is this I can go back in and restamp when I'm like, oh, I missed that spot, I need a little bit more there. I highly recommend for techniques like this. Okay, I like that. I'm gonna hit it with my heat tool because I don't want to have too much movement over here, so to dry that off. I really like how this came out. So very soft and pretty. All right, I can set that one aside. Now, there's one more way of doing, or one more way I'm going to show you. I'm sure there's plenty of other ways of doing the watercolor stamping with like a lined stamp like this. Let me grab a couple things. The next method is to use watercolor markers to color the stamp in. So, for example, I've got Tombows, and now this is going to take a little bit more time than what we did for our ones where we stamped with dyeing, because we're going to have to color in. Oh, you know what? And let's grab, since we're doing it this way, a yellow for the center of the flower. Now, I also have Zig Real Brush watercolor markers. I like the Tombows a little bit better for something like this because it's got a firmer brush to it. So it makes it easier to color on the stamp. So I'm gonna come in and color the areas that I want to do in yellow. And I'm not gonna wait too long between stamping because it'll dry on me. Let's do over here and get that yellow center on. And then what you can do is come in with your brush and soften it and blend it. And this is basically going to give us kind of more of a no line effect with our watercolor coloring than we did in the last video where we stamped it and then watercolored it. So let me go through, and maybe I'll just do like the big flower on camera because this process is a little time consuming. And having a Misty for doing this is pretty much essential because I can only go so far in my coloring before the pen starts to dry and it makes it a little harder to get it to stamp. So being able to stamp it over and over again in the same spot, plus once we start, it's less visible with the yellow, but it will be when we do our purple here. Now, because we've got big spaces with the leaves, the amount of ink we got on there from just stamping may not be sufficient for coloring in our petals. So what we can do is scribble some of the marker onto an acrylic block and use that to help blend. I can come in and scribble some of my light purple onto the block, take a little water on my brush, and add more color in. I'm also going to put a little of the dark purple on the block so I can bring a little of that in. gonna go back in and ink the stamp some more. Actually, let's work on some of the leaves that's not gonna touch the wettest part that I'm working on. Let's do this branch of leaves coming off the flower. Give that a moment to dry before we come back in purple again, because that'll bring back some of the dimension. Now this is one of those things, it's up to you what look you're going for, how wet and loose you want it. Again, pretty much the same process. I'm gonna soften the lines by bringing in water and then add some marker to a block. Some of the light green and some of the dark green on our block. Alright, now I want to bring back some of the definition in our flower, so I'm gonna ink up my stamp again. Now you can of course go back through and soften up the lines again of the petals or leave it like this. That's up to you. I'm gonna go through and finish doing this so you can see what it looks like done, but now that you get the idea of how to do it, it's gonna take a little while, so I don't want to bore you to death with that, plus then it'll make the video ridiculously long. So I'll be back. Okay, so here's what it looks like finished, and for comparison, last video we watercolored with distress inks after stamping in black, so you get a much softer look using this technique than you do when you stamp in black with a permanent ink and then watercolor. All right, so I think I got one more technique I'm going to show you, and that is we're going to do an emboss resist piece. So I am going to grab my Versamark, which is an embossing ink. So it's a clear ink, which I've probably said this before because I don't even remember what I've done so far for this video. But we're going to ink that up, and I probably should grab my embossing powder. I got embossing powder. And as I'm doing this, I'm like, oh wait, there was one more technique I wanted to do. There's just so many cool ways you can play with your stamps. All right, let's do this. Double checking to make sure we're all embossed, and we're looking good. All right, I'm gonna grab, okay, so I've got my splat box up, I've got my piece on a little rack, I've got, and actually I'm gonna add another piece of just cheap watercolor paper because it makes for easier cleanup. So I've already got cleanup sheets there. I have pulled out Distress Spray Stain in Peacock Feathers and Shabby Shutters, and Oxide in Peacock Feathers and Pealed Paint. I'm gonna start by getting my paper a little wet, and then I'm gonna spray it with my sprays. Should have sprayed the back. I'm gonna flip it because this will cut down on curling. Let's get a little bit of movement. There we go, along the edges, because the edges did not get very much inky goodness on them. Now, if you do use a heat tool for this process, make sure you hold it a good distance away, like you don't get too close, and you're constantly moving it around because you don't want to remelt your embossing powder, because that'll ruin the effect. I think since it's no longer saturated, I'm gonna set this aside and let it dry the rest of the way naturally, and then we'll come back. Let me get the back a little dry so I can put it down on something. Set that aside, let it dry completely, then I'll come back and we will wipe off the white where we have stamped so you can see the full effect of the resist. Okay, so we want to do one more technique, and I want to go a little grungy for our florals. And so I want to stamp the background again like we have did for one of them. And so I'm grabbing Crafty by Toni stamp, and it's from Journey, which is CBT004. I'll leave a link to her Etsy shop. I think for this I'm gonna pull out archival vintage photo, because again I want a permanent ink for what we're doing. So we're gonna do the scripty bit in vintage photo, and then grab sand dune to do some splattery stamps. So for this one I'm just gonna kind of stamp the scripty stamp around. Now I'm going to grab the splatter stamp from Tiny Toadstools, which is Tim Holtz Stampers Anonymous CMS 377. Do that in sand dune. This one I am going to grab a block for because I just think that'll be easier. All right. Next step is we are going to grab back our my Misty with the stamp in it, and I am going to use Versamark again, and we are going to emboss with Distress Embossing Glaze, which is a translucent embossing powder. Now, if you stamped with a colored ink, because the embossing powder is translucent, it will impact the color. So, for example, I grabbed Vintage Photo and Crushed Olive. So if I had stamped with like the same color, it would intensify the color. So maybe we'll do Crushed Olive for the next one. Uh-oh, I may not have waited long enough. I think some of our blobs are splatter stamping still wet, but you know what? I don't mind that. I think that might actually be kind of cool. I'm going to set that aside. Now I'll show you what I mean with Crushed Olive. We'll grab that ink out. Let's heat emboss these guys, and then we'll add a little distress ink to get them even grungier. Okay, now because it's translucent, you can see the stamping below through it. A little less noticeable on the Vintage Photo, but you can see the writing through the embossing glaze. Now let's add a little bit of ink to this, and what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna grab out a block and smoosh some inks on and tap it onto here with the block. Yes. Or tap this into the block kind of thing. Let's see. I think I want to do a little old paper oxide, maybe a little Vintage Photo, definitely add some crushed olive, but maybe not to both of them. And maybe a smidge of brushed corduroy oxide. I'm going to put the Distress ink down first, because if you get it in the oxide, it will contaminate the ink pad. You can wipe it off, but why not save the headache? Whereas you're not going to have, see, there's some getting on there, but it's, you can wipe it off easy enough. It's not that big of a deal, but the other way around, it's a little bit more of a headache because the oxides have pigment in them, whereas the Distress inks don't. That aside for a sec, and we're gonna play around with this one for a little bit. Wipe off the block and add a little bit more of just the old paper, and I think I may grab some old paper Distress ink. That has green undertones to it. And then let's toss in a little crushed olive. Definitely want more of the green in here. So one more wipe off, this time just old paper Distress ink and some crushed olive. I feel like I need to grab a paintbrush to get it to move because it's getting like trapped in the grooves of the... Add a little green to this. Yeah, sure, why not? Actually, I'm gonna mist it a little before I dip. And we'll pick up what we pick up from the plate. And then I do want to add a little Uncharted Mariner to it as well. That toned it down. Now, I think I want splatters of Uncharted Mariner, so I have some dots of the super intense color. Try my Tim Holtz splatter brush because I kind of want some bigger dots. Alright, gonna let this one dry. I'm gonna bring back the other one because I do want some, I think, crushed olive splatters on it. Maybe do a little brown. I'm trying to decide if I want to use Vintage Photo or maybe Scorched Timber for the brown. Let's clean up. Thinking I want Scorched Timber because I want the dark. Like I want them to be dark. Try this. I'm gonna be careful not to remelt the powder. Set that aside, pull this over and do some brown splatters on this one. Set that aside. While those I'm letting sit and hopefully get a little drier, we are going to pull over our first emboss resist piece that we did. It is dry, and I'm going to take a dry towel and rub over the embossed areas, which should cause the ink to move off. You can also do slightly damp, but you got to be very careful because it will affect the ink around it. Not really pressing, I'm just kind of rubbing the rag over top because I don't want to impact the ink on the paper, but I do want to take more off of the embossed areas. That one's done. These guys are still a little damp. All right, we're gonna take this guy and do this. And then we're gonna come in and just rub over the whole piece gently to remove any ink that's on top of our embossing powder. All right, so there we go. We've got 3 pieces where we did emboss resist, and just between the 3 pieces they look totally different. This one, because we spread it out in the middle, has a different look from this one where we left it a little bit more splotchy, and both of them are different from the ones where we went bright colors and used sprays. So let's pull out the rest that we've done today. So we've got those guys. Then we've got the watercolor stamping techniques that we did. And so we've got the one where we used ink cubes to ink specific areas and then spritzed our stamp before stamping. We've got the one where we did a little background stamping and then just did one solid color and spritzed. We've got the one where we spritzed and moved the ink around a little bit to fill in the flowers and then stamped a second time to bring back some of the detail. We've got the one where we stamped in the background, did a little spritz and didn't spritz heavily, so we've just got a little bit of like movement. And then we've got the ones we did, the one we did with the alcohol marker, or not alcohol markers, watercolor markers, so that we could get a soft watercolor look. We've also done the white stamping on a dark background. We did the Versamark stamping. I don't know how well it's showing up on camera. Let me come up closer so you can actually see it. So, very subtle look. Stamped in black on an inky background. We stamped on black and embossed on a painty background. We stamped in black on a inky book page. We stamped on vellum and embossed with, I think that's vintage champagne embossing powder. We stamped and embossed in white on an alcohol ink background. Then we did alcohol ink, lift ink on an alcohol inked background. And I did do one off camera where I ink blended it out so that it got a better result than this one. Like it was more what I was looking for. Let me bring them up closer so you can get a better look. So we've got more of it being a white impression of the stamped image, unlike here where it's kind of like the staining of the ink. So that's what? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17 different looks. In addition to the ones we did in part 1 where we came up with 9 different looks from the first video, I think. So all using the same stamp. So hopefully this will remind you to just try different techniques with the stamps you have, because you can get wildly different results depending on what you do with the stamp. So that's all for today. If you enjoyed this video, please do all the things that lets YouTube know you enjoyed the video. Like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, leave me a comment down below. Thanks for joining me, and happy crafting.